All right, we're going to get started on this panel. Often without the benefit of some state chapter of some well-funded national organization, one real person, someone marked with passion and with guts, led the drive for change. Our next panel here shows how some of the stars in the education reform movement built relationships, formed coalitions, and implemented winning strategies from the real grassroots right on up. Cara Carwin, as you know, is the Vice President for External Affairs and the next President of the Center for Education Reform. Jeannie Allen said about Cara, she's been part of creating and promoting every major accomplishment of CER since she stepped through the doors of our building in the year 2000. Janet Parisi worked in Oklahoma public school systems as a speech pathologist, became an award-winning community activist dentist, and then went on to establish Oklahoma's first charter school, and then a high school that is now ranked among the top 25 high schools in the country. In 2011, Janet was sworn in as Oklahoma's first new state superintendent of education in 20 years. Zakiya Courtney is Director of Community Relations for Catapult Learning, a leading provider of K-12 education support services. And Zakiya previously spent 7 years as a school design and development coordinator in Howard Fuller's shop at Marquette University, and is a former Director of Parents for School Choice in Milwaukee. As a school board member, Bill Manning led Delaware's second largest school district, promoting changes that put families in control of school selection. And Bill collaborated to help the governor enact Delaware's charter school law. And his school district then authorized the first charter school and went on to authorize 4 more charter schools, and remains to this day, I believe, the only local school district in Delaware ever to do so. Kevin Teasley is president and founder of the Greater Educational Opportunities Foundation, headquartered in Indianapolis, and is the co-founder of several charter schools in Indiana and Colorado. Kevin also served as executive director of Excel, the organization that sponsored California's Prop 174 school choice initiative in 1993. And Leah Vuckmeyer is serving her first term in the Wisconsin Senate after 4 terms in the State Assembly. A registered nurse and former research fellow at Wisconsin Policy Research Institute, Leah founded Parents Raising Educational Standards in Schools and has served on several gubernatorial committees studying statewide educational policy, and has been a leader in school choice and charter school expansion in Wisconsin. Cara?
Great, thank you, Brian. Well, talk about changing the power arrangement. The individuals sitting up here are my mentors and people that you all need to sit, listen, and spend some time with, because I enjoyed working with them over the years, getting the phone calls. I still remember, I think I'm gonna run for state superintendent. I'm just sick of, we gotta get something done, and how your stories from your dentist chair got laws passed. I just love it. The true meaning of grassroots is fighting really hard, and all of these people up here really understand that, and they fight for what's right. They fight for really, really good, strong, principled reforms. It's not just the fly-by-night advocacy. They know it is about boots on the ground, doing the hard work, and doing what's not always cool. So enough about me speaking. You need to listen to their stories and how they did it, take notes, and then go replicate it in your states and communities across the country.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm sitting here more as a mom than I am as a state superintendent, because this is all bringing me back, and I kind of feel like a little bit like Yoda. I guess our movement into Oklahoma, into this, really began back in 1995 when I was sitting in northwest Oklahoma City as a mom, and my husband and I had to make a decision about where our kids were going to go to 6th grade. And I knew that the the school they were supposed to move to from their elementary school was not one where we wanted our kids to attend. A lot of problems in the school, a lot of problems in the faculty, a lot of problems in the educational programs. And so, long story short, I put together really a grassroots operation of parents. And it was with enormous pushback by the Oklahoma City School District, with the exception of one individual. And I think that's part of this, is you form grassroots organizations, you have to find a toehold with someone that is in the establishment that wants to listen to the story. But it really also began with me getting on the internet and coming across a website. And that website was the Center for Education Reform. It was the first resource that I went to as I began to learn about this world of education choice and the opportunities that were possible for my children. And bless his heart, I don't know who the young man was. I cannot remember who I called on that day in 1995, but was extremely helpful and was continued to be hammered throughout the months from me with questions. Got a chance to talk to Jeannie also, and she answered a lot of questions, was very supportive, made visits to the state subsequently. But in 1995, Oklahoma did not have a charter law, and it looked like that was not going to happen. I remember hearing panelists up here talking about, well, that'll never happen. There's no chance of that happening. I went to that one person in the Oklahoma City School District who knew that something had to be different, and that was the assistant superintendent. And we began to talk about what was possible, and we were able then to open a school before the charter law was even passed based on deregulation. We called it charter-like because it didn't have complete autonomy, but it was a starting point. And then I immediately turned and worked with a couple of legislators to write and get passage of the state's charter law. And I remember as we were going through this efforts to open Independence Enterprise Middle School that then converted in 2000 to a charter school, I remember the superintendent of Oklahoma City Public Schools, obviously not on the same page with his assistant superintendent, but the superintendent of Oklahoma City Public Schools says, "Lady, the day you get that school is the day pigs will fly." And so you can imagine, I now have a really great collection in my office of pigs with wings on them and flying pigs. As a matter of fact, I'm kicking myself because I forgot to bring my flying pigs earrings with me today that were just giving to me, that I love to wear when I'm going up against folks that still think I'm nuts in what I'm doing. But it is one to where if you build a grassroots organization, it really has to begin with you, and you look at parents and you can say to them, what do you want educationally for your child? I literally, with the help of about 8 of my friends, put out flyers in parking lots of elementary schools, stood in line and handed flyers to parents that were waiting to pick up their kids, and invited them to the first meeting. That was at an elementary school, and then after that, we were told we couldn't have any more meetings at elementary schools. We had to pick a neutral site, so we went to a church. But literally on that first meeting, we began with, what do you want for your child educationally? The input from then started the fervor and the excitement. And so the main reason that parents were coming to that meeting is because they wanted safety for their child, because they weren't getting it at the middle school that these kids were supposed to go to. And then after we began to build the coalition to open Independence Enterprise Middle School, then the parents, and the parents felt very empowered by that, because we broke up into committees around the process of really building and organizing the school. And it was almost as though parents were learning how to be volunteers again in a school, because for so long, their work had been pushed out. Their interests had been pushed out. They were great for bake sales, but please don't be a part of this school and what we're doing in this school. And they became very empowered, very effective, and very good consumers of what good education looks like. And so I still remember fondness for those days of incredibly long hours. So running a full-time dental practice, sometimes getting up and doing some work about the school. My front desk person said she also felt like she was a school secretary. Working through that with parents through those times, going home at night and after the kids were in bed, staying, working on the computer, working about something about developing the school, those long hours, I can tell you were absolutely some of the most fulfilling of my life. Right now in Oklahoma, the state charter law passed in 1999, and it was very restrictive, but it was after at 11 o'clock that morning, I was told that the law wasn't going to pass. They were going to pull it and try it again next session. And then at 3 o'clock that afternoon, Governor Frank Keating told the state legislature that if they wanted state rainy day funds for their budgeting, they were going to pass the charter law. And I was called at 4 o'clock that afternoon and was told, get down here, this thing's going to happen. And watched it pass at 10:45 on the last day of the legislative session. And never in my dreams did I think it would include the ability for a charter former to opt out of collective bargaining. That was really a bridge too far. I didn't think we'd get a charter law and then to omit collective bargaining. We got it all. It is restrictive to pretty much Oklahoma City and Tulsa with a couple of exceptions. The stage is right in Oklahoma right now. We only have 25 charters. About 12,000 kids attend charter schools in Oklahoma. 8,000 of them are in bricks and mortar, and 4,000 are in virtual schools. We just have instituted our first virtual chartering authority, virtual school chartering authority. That board is now in place. They will take authority in July of 2014, and the stage is really set now to expand of education choice, but also for charter schools in the state of Oklahoma. And so it is from that point of being a mom, of working with the grassroots, these people, I watch them every single day work, every single day, relentlessly, and putting one step in front of the other and beginning to feel increased empowerment. And to those people, I can tell you, those are the builders of the school. And those are the people who I will always be grateful to. We opened a second charter school, Harding Charter Prep, opened in 2003. It was with many of the same parents. But obviously, based on the success of independence, Harding opened with a lot less resistance, and it's just very exciting to see what those schools turn out every single year. So again, with gratitude to Grassroots and to every parent that had the faith in the effort, I will always be grateful.
Zakia.
Hello, everyone. So my story picks up as one of those parents that you're talking about in Oklahoma City, except I was in Milwaukee, okay? And that's what I'm gonna talk about today, just simply being a part of this movement as a parent. My involvement in the school choice movement came as a result of wanting something better for my children than what I saw in the existing public school system. I have an extended blended family. I'm the mother of 6. When we put the families together, it comes out to about 14. My husband of 35 years is here with me today. And I was one of those people I had from my first marriage. I had 2 children. By the time I got ready to do it again, I wanted to have a better husband, have better children, you know, make all the right, decisions. I think I did okay, all right? So I wanted something different for my second set of kids than I had for my first set of kids. I had a son who went to 13 different public schools before 7th grade. I wasn't in a position to be able to afford private school, so that was not an option. Scholarships, that was not available. And so I kept searching, I kept looking, all right? Ultimately, for him, he never did find success in the public school system and found very limited success in life. In fact, he was murdered on the streets of Milwaukee in 1998. Everything that I've done has been a result of what it is that I've learned from my experience as a mother and a concerned member of my community. So the job that I do today is not what I'm going to talk about. The degrees that I have is not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about those grassroots parents that you talked about, because that's who I am. All right, that's who I am. And because I wanted something better for my own children, that started my search. And in Milwaukee, we had a school called Urban Day. Oh, well, actually, it's still there. There's a school called Urban Day. And it was a private school. And I knew some people who attended there, but I always thought that private school was outside of my reach because I couldn't afford it. And then a friend of mine who attended school said, well, you know what? They offer scholarships to parents who have skills that they can offer to the school. And so I'm an at-home mom, and I'm like, okay, well, let me go and I'll apply. The tuition at that time was $600 a year. And while that sounds like nothing, you know, it can be a lot, especially if you have more than one child. But I went to the school and I offered my skills, and in exchange for the skills that I had, they made scholarship opportunities available to me. And at Urban Day, they were able to see the potential that I had, not only as a parent, but also as a member of the community. And they nurtured that within me. And how did they do that? They got me actively involved in committees. You know, became a part of the parent board, eventually became a part of the school board. They offered me a job because the principal at the school wanted to go on a conference and she didn't have anybody to leave in charge of the school. And she said, but if you do this for 1 week, your tuition will be free. I'm like, for a month. I said, oh, okay, I can do that. And I had no education background at all. But she felt secure in leaving me at the school because I knew the school, I knew the board, I knew the parents, I knew the teachers, and there was a mutual respect. When Sister Virginia came back from that trip, she so enjoyed what happened. She said, well, Sakia, why don't you stay on for another couple of months? This will give me an opportunity to work on development. And as I listened to her, she said the magic word: your tuition would be free for the rest of the year. And I said yes. And so that's how I got involved in education. And this whole time, as they were nurturing this, they were talking about these opportunities about having contracts with the public schools so that schools like Urban Day and other community-based schools could be able to share the resources in the public school system because we had the exact same kids. And it made sense to me. Why not? But it didn't make sense to anybody else. And so the panel before, when they were talking about the politics, I wasn't there. I didn't really understand the politics, and my husband used to tell me all the time that everything is political. But I learned real fast. I learned really, really fast about what it was that was going on. And so then we started as parents to reach out to the public school system, to get that type of support. And one of the people we reached out to, and she was on the panel earlier, was Debbie McGriff. She was there in Milwaukee. She was new, and she was with, for whatever reason, his name is escaping me, Bob Peterkin, right, was a superintendent. And we met with them. And we met with them as parents. We talked about, what our goals were, what it was that we wanted to do. And they were in agreement, to make a long story short. The legislation was crafted. And then we always say that on the way to Madison, which was our state capital, it got hijacked by the teachers union, all right? The teachers union started putting language in that legislation that we couldn't live with as the private schools. They wanted to determine what the curriculum was. They wanted to determine who the teachers were. They wanted to do a whole lot of things, and so we backed out. But when we backed out, then we started organizing as parents, because if we couldn't do it this way, then we needed to find another way to do it, even though the Milwaukee Public Schools at that time was very cooperative. So then working with Annette Polly Williams, who we consider the grandmother of the school choice movement in Milwaukee, she said to us, she came to us, she said, you know what, we might be able to get this legislation passed and just go past MPS. And we were like, what do you mean go past MPS, Milwaukee Public Schools? That's everything. How can you go past MPS? And she said, go directly to Department of Public Instruction. And so that's what we started. And she was working, you know, with the Republican legislatures. And I can't go through the whole history because it's too much. But there's a lot of revisionist history out there. No, really, really. You know, I respect people who write books, but sometimes I wonder where the sources are. Because sometimes I read things and I'm like, wait a minute, you know, I was there. And I don't remember it happening like that. I don't have to be mentioned, but I don't remember it happening like that. So there's a lot of revisionist history that's out there. And oftentimes in this revisionist history, the contribution of parents is not discussed. And in many instances, it's not really totally understood. People would come to Milwaukee and wonder, how did we do it, you know, in Milwaukee? And so I was one of those people that organized tours where people would have the opportunity to go and see and visit the schools, you know, and then meet the people who were instrumental in making the change happen. And one of the things I found from all of the visitors that used to come to Milwaukee is that the element that they did not have, that we did have in Milwaukee, were parents. We're parents. We were the ones who were going to be affected by this legislation, these policy changes. Why not have our input? And oftentimes, even today, I find that schools, some legislators, and others discount the role of parents because they see themselves as knowing best. This is not a father know best, you know, kind of system. We as parents know what it is that we want to have for our children. And while oftentimes we may not have all of the nitty-gritty details, as parents, and if you're a parent, you know what it is that's good for your child. And you make decisions every day on the basis of what it is that is good for your children. So as I talk about having the multitude of children that I have, no two children are alike. So my children attended public schools, private schools, charter schools. Is there anything left? Everything but at home. That's the one thing I did not do, okay? That's the one thing that I did not do. In Milwaukee, Milwaukee was smart enough to find people like myself when we started to really rev up this movement. People like me, and when I say that, what I'm talking about is people who knew their community like the back of their hand. They were not new. They hadn't got hired to study the community. They didn't get hired you didn't have to be introduced to who the politicians were, all right? All of the politicians in Milwaukee that we were trying to impact were my friends. We had been doing this for years, all right? So this was not new. And so then when I had the responsibility of organizing a cadre of parents who could go out and impact the community, then what I looked for was people and parents that were just like me. They knew their community just like I did. So what did that mean? That meant I needed somebody Hispanic. I needed somebody white. You know, I needed a male. Whatever it was that I thought I needed in order to go ahead and build this, I did. Because this is what was important. There was no need for me to go and try and introduce myself to you when I knew somebody else who knew you even better. Now, every city doesn't have what we have in Milwaukee. I always say there's 1 degree of separation from anybody or anything that we need to know, all right? And many times it's just half a degree. But what was important is that we had people who knew their community, who were passionate, you know, for what it was that needed to be done, who had a personal interest, not just getting paid. They had a personal interest in what it was that they were trying to do. And when we talk about, and before, when somebody held up the sign, a sense of urgency, urgency was very important, because oftentimes when we talk about reform, all right, they talk about over years, all right? But let's think about this for a moment. If you have a child that's in 4th grade, and we're talking about an initiative or a reform that's going to take 4 years, all right, that child is either on his way to high school, you know, or unfortunately maybe someplace else. And if it doesn't happen in that 4-year time, they're somewhere in high school, and the reform still yet has not taken place. So as adults, we have the option of 5 years, 10 years, because what's going to happen? Gain weight, lose weight, few gray hairs, lose hair. You know, that's what happens to us as adults. But what is it that happens to our children? You know, and are we prepared, or have we been prepared for the consequences of that? I've had the good fortune, again, of being involved in this movement for a long time. And I can look at my children, and I can look at my grandchildren, and I can see the results of the work that we did. And this work is not just for my children, but the impact that it has had on thousands of children. Because if I think about it like this, my oldest daughter is now 43. 43. And her son was one of the first people to be involved in the school choice. And now he has children, all right? What if we were waiting for a 10-year, a 15-year, a 20-year reform to take place? Where would those children be today? So that sense of urgency, yes, we absolutely don't have time. What I'd like to say in closing is that when we organized in the old-fashioned way. I mean, I love email, texting, twitting, and all this other stuff that we do. But we organized in the old-fashioned way. Word of mouth, passed out flyers, made phone calls. Some of you may have never heard of a phone tree, all right? But it worked, you know, and the fact that, we could get 1,000 parents, you know, we were excited. That was good. Being able to put politicians on the spot, you know, and the former governor of Wisconsin, Governor Tommy Thompson, talks about this to this day, that at a rally that we held with 600 people, and I introduced him, and he came up to speak, and I put him on the spot, and I asked him whether or not he was going to support, you know, this initiative. And he told me later on, he said, you know what, Sakia, up until that point, I didn't think that I would. But when I looked out there and I saw all those children and I saw those parents, I knew that that was the right thing to do. Plus, I had put him on the spot in front of all the cameras. And so he knew, you know, that was exactly what it was that he needed to do. So in closing, knowing your community, knowing who are the people who can make things happen. And they're not oftentimes, in fact, most times, they're not the ones, you know, with the big names. They're the ones who have the ultimate investment in this movement. And that is those who have their children. Parents, we don't want to be window dressing. We don't want to be the people that you pull out when it's time for a press conference, or you want to look good, or you even want to raise additional money. You know, we know what it is that's best for our children, and if we want our movement to be successful, we want to be inclusive of those parents from the very beginning, not just when the cameras are there. Thank you very much.
So, Bill, you came at this from a different direction. You were a parent, but you were also a school board member.
Yep.
So talk about a little bit about your history there, but the impact of being a school board member, but also being a parent.
I will do that. Thank you, Kara. And before I begin, I would like to thank CER, Jeannie, Kara, for bringing us all together. It's nice to be in a room where everybody's gathered to talk about education and not have to look at your shoes all the time and avoid eye contact for fear that you'll be drawn into some kind of confrontation. I feel a little bit like my high school reunion, you know, and you've all been there. You go back and you look out across the room and you say, gosh, they've all made it. I feel really thankful right now because all my good friends have made it. They avoided pestilence and famine and war, and in the case of some of my friends, prison. And they're all here, and you've all survived, and I think that's terrific, and I thank Jeannie for giving us the opportunity to come together. I mentioned friends, and so before I do anything else, I'd like to introduce my best friend, and who knows more of the people in this room than I do, and my wife, Martha, who has been a partner in this cause for, well, a long, long time. She may be looking for number two because she could undoubtedly do better, but thank you. She hasn't done that yet. Grassroots was a little different for me because I was a double agent. I did something foolish. I ran for a school board back in the late 80s. And I say the late 80s because no one in my community had ever heard of a charter school. I had never heard of a charter school, but I knew things had to change. I had notions of parental choice. I had thoughts about competition. I had thoughts about assessments, which measure the gain of each child in the presence of each teacher, and then using that data to drive all the decisions that a school can make. But those were just loose thoughts in my head at the time. I was lucky enough to win. And that gave me, what? Power. When in our state, the governor needed the support of my school district and 2 or 3 others in order to get an initiative that he was interested in succeeding. And so we did a deal, and I said, Governor, I think it's time for Delaware to consider charter schools, and I will do that. Or if you do that, I think I can talk my school board into supporting your initiative. And he did, and we did, and one thing led to another. And Red Clay, my school district, which is the 2nd largest school district at the time, became the first district to charter a school in Delaware. We chartered 3 more after that, and then the forces of the night took over, and Red Clay has not chartered a school since. I'm very proud of those schools, one of which is an excellent high school dedicated to math and science. It's in the city of Wilmington, which is the city of my birth, the city where Martha and I live, the city where Martha raised 4 children and I watched. And it's an important place to me. It's also a place where public interest, or the public education, I think, is serving the residents of Wilmington most poorly. If you want to look for where schools need to really get better in Delaware, you have to go to Wilmington. I found myself, having run for a school district, I found myself with friends who helped me get elected, and then we got them elected. And so we had a majority on a school board. And for 10 years or so, we had this school district, which was kind of the Peck's bad boy of public education, at least in the eyes of the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction. And we without any state law encouraging us to do so or permitting us to do so, and over the active resistance of the State Board, we decided that we were going to let children go where they want to go and where their families want them to go. Everybody said we couldn't do it, that it would fail miserably. 90-some% of all children in our district got their first choice that first year, and that led to a law which made public school choice the law of the land, at least in Delaware. That was the same year that charter schools were first enabled. And so I have been, in a way, benefited by being a double agent. I didn't have to have a phone tree except to get elected. And then we just did things while no one was watching. I am reminded, sitting here today, of how it's still tough to promote education reform, to promote school choice, and to promote charter schools. It still depends on there being strong individuals who are willing to be warriors. I love the line a minute ago, which talked about whether you could compromise with those who are your mortal enemies, and the advice from a sage legislator was, no, you just have to kill them. Well, I think that's unfortunately right, at least in my state. No district has yet, the authorizers in Delaware can be the state board or local district boards. No district has ever done it other than Red Clay, and Red Clay won't do it now. So, and while the state is the only game in town and has authorized charters, it's still driven by what Jeannie calls the blob. And the blob wants to re-regulate charter schools. The blob asks the question, well, if it's good for this school, then why shouldn't you have to do it? And to ask that question is to misunderstand fundamentally what charter schools are all about. And yet, those are our authorizers. It's the only game in town. We still have annual trench warfares with our teachers union. It's an NEA affiliate. And the legislature reminds one of World War I, where you've got trenches, deep trenches that have been dug there and haven't moved for years. And every spring, somebody pops up out of those trenches and shoots at the other guy, and then they go back into the trenches for another year. There are bright spots in Delaware, and I happen to be, have the good fortune to be associated with one of them. It is happening in the city of my birth, and we are the beneficiary. I'm a part of a group that is accepting the donation of a large downtown office building. All you Bank of America people, thank you very much. And we're converting it into a home for, I'm not sure how many schools there will be. There will be 2,400 students, and so you can do the math and figure out how many schools we're likely to have. They have to apply. Our standards are more rigorous than those applied by the state in granting or denying a charter. We're having a great deal of fun imagining what else we can do beyond being a landlord. We can, in addition to removing the constant bricks and mortar struggle from the list of things that charter school administrators have to do each day, we find that we can offer ancillary services that can buy using the economy of scale. We can provide lunch so that they don't have to fiddle with having a cafeteria or otherwise dealing with how to feed their children. And we can help them discover ways to get better. At least that's the theory with which we're proceeding. The first schools will, and when I say first schools, our building will open next year. One of our first tenants will be a school that has been in existence for 10 years and has done fabulously well teaching the children of downtown Wilmington. Another school is one that will be new. It will attempt to cater, because we're all driven by lottery, so when you can't pick your market, but I expect that this school district will offer education to our Latino community. We find that although as I said, there's trench warfare out there, there are spots where, as Cy Flegel once told me, you can dance in the dark. I asked him one time long ago when I went to East District number 4, or District number 4 in East Harlem. I said, Cy, how did you manage to accomplish all this stuff? He said, Bill, we're dancing in the dark. Nobody cares what we do here. And there are spots where the system won't fight you as much. We think we've found a spot, and we hope when the dust settles, well, no, in the near term, that the educational lot of kids in Wilmington has been improved dramatically. So that's my hope.
Great. For all of you who are new to this, the blob is the big learning organizational bureaucracy. It oozes, it creeps, it's like a Steve McQueen movie. So just so you know that, thank you, Bill, for bringing that up. It's an important, very important piece of ed reform history. Now on to Kevin. Kevin, you come at this a little differently too. Now, as Zakiya and Janet both pointed out, it's not about C3s, it's about really having the parents at the heart of it. But talk to us a little bit about how you've seen, because you've been around doing this in California and then Indiana, starting schools. How has the landscape for Grassroots really changed since, I guess, what was it, 1993?
Yeah, quite a bit. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. When I was asked, I was wondering what I would call my little talk, if it was a confession, if it was lessons learned, and I finally came back to, we've come a long way, baby. I've known Jeannie before CER. I was actually at Heritage Foundation doing public relations, and she was an education analyst at Heritage Foundation. And Heritage Foundation is a big think tank here in Washington, D.C., and they put out a lot of white papers. And Jeannie did the same, and I became an advocate for school choice, primarily because of what she was writing, and then John Chubb and Terry Moe writing Politics, Markets, and America's Schools, if you're familiar with that book, kind of turned the school choice movement on fire, so to speak. I went to another think tank called Reason Foundation, a libertarian-based organization out in LA. And instead of putting out a bunch of white papers, we decided to have a bunch of forums to talk about this idea of school choice. It was public school choice. It was across district lines within the district. It was, then there was this lady in Milwaukee, Polly Williams, who, along with others, got a voucher bill passed.
And we started talking about vouchers in California. We actually had Polly come out and talk about it. What was the motivation? What was the battle like? Well, it was from that activity. We had forums from San Diego up to San Francisco and everywhere in between that we got together with a group of folks, and here's the confession part, who were very much policy wonks, very sincere, very interested, very wealthy individuals who wanted to put a voucher initiative on the ballot. This was back in, actually, it started in 1990. In 1991, we wanted to be on the ballot in 1992. So let me take you back in time a little bit. The internet really wasn't around in 1990, 1989, 1990, 91. We were still faxing, folks. And we didn't have phones that looked like this. They would look more like a brick, if you remember, if you could afford one, frankly. In 1991, we decided to put an initiative on the ballot in California. We had lawyers, we had corporate leaders sitting around a boardroom, and I was in there. Every single one of us was white, but we all had, say, the intention of helping poor, Black, and Latino families. That was primarily the intention, to access quality schools. None of us were close to Black or Latino families, and I'll tell you how I know that. We got the initiative written by lawyers, then we got the initiative approved and on the ballot by paid signature gatherers, 650,000 signatures. And then we all gathered back into the same boardroom, and we hired political consultants who said, okay, now we're in a campaign. We got to do radio, TV, and we got to put a face to this campaign. Anybody know any Black or Latino families? And everybody kind of looked at each other, and then they started looking at me. And they said, Kevin, you're charged to find them. Are you kidding me? So there I was, and this is one of the most important lessons I've ever learned, and went down to Crenshaw Boulevard. Anybody's familiar with Crenshaw Boulevard in South Central LA? Visited with a young, not a young man, an older man, Dr. Anium Palmer. Maybe some of you know him. He was running a all-black private school on Crenshaw Boulevard. And he took me in and gave me the lesson of my life. And that was, Kevin, obviously I'm supportive of school choice. I started a private school because the school across the street stinks. I think my community needs a better choice. But the problem is, I don't know you. Who are you? And he literally said, you could be a carpetbagger. You know how many white guys come into my community saying they've got the greatest thing since sliced bread, and they're trying to sell something. But you know what? None of them were at my mom's funeral. None of them helped build this school that you're sitting in right now. None of them were at my daughter's wedding. I don't know you. So the fact of the matter is, I don't trust you. And even further down below is, what's in it for you? You don't live in this community. Are you getting paid? So I may be a believer in school choice, but if you don't have the relationship, forget it, folks. And you've heard it time and time again on the various panels here about the importance of relationships. Well, we thought we had a great idea, but California didn't think it was a great idea. We lost 70-30. Why did we lose? If we started out with poll numbers saying 70-30 in our favor, we lost 70-30. Well, the other side was much more organized. And if you've read the book about Sam Walton and how he made Walmart, the truth of the matter is why Walmart is so successful is because they have an information distribution system and a financial collection system in place that's similar to our opposition in school choice. It's called the unions. Walmart has their stores, and they restore their product as quickly as it's sold, and they order as quickly as it's sold. It's on the time, just in time restoring. Well, in our business, marketing or unions have the information distribution and financial collection system, second to none. It's called the union members. They're the financial means. They provide the union dues. And it's also called the union members who receive the information from the blob or the union leadership. Second to none. On our side, the school choice proponents are usually entrepreneurs, very independent, very strong-minded, and they may like school choice, but there's all kinds of different choices of school choice. Tax credits, vouchers, vouchers for everybody, vouchers for a few, vouchers for just a low income, vouchers for middle income. What is it? Tax credits? What is it? So we have these intellectual discussions. Well, in the school choice, and again, like I said, part of this saying, my discussion is we've come a long way. We have come a long way. Back in 1992, people were making contributions to the school voucher campaign that I was leading because they liked so-and-so. Or so-and-so gave to my campaign, so I'm going to give to his campaign. They didn't give to the Prop 174 campaign because we had a plan to win. They gave because maybe they liked Milton Friedman. They liked the idea of school choice. Maybe it was a rich guy that owed another rich guy a favor. But we didn't have a plan to win. So we lost. And after we lost, I went back to the wealthy contributors and I said, you guys gave and none of you asked me for a business plan. And you gave some serious money. John Walton was one of them. And it was one of his first political campaign contributions he ever made. It was in 1992, 93. And that was a long campaign trying to get him to support the campaign. But I then introduced John to various other wealthy individuals and I said, you guys got to get together and essentially form a venture capital fund so that because you're now going to become well known. Everybody knows who's contributing to school choice. You're going to get hit from all across the country. You need to be making decisions because the issue of school choice deserves a much better approach than what we just did in California. You have to have a business plan to win. And so that led to something called American Education Reform Foundation. That led to something called American Federation for Children, today led by Betsy DeVos. But along the way, we then went back, at least I did, turning away from white papers and books. Because I tell you what, there's a few people, and they've been mentioned, and there's one individual on this panel who has had a huge impact on me, Zakiya Courtney. I took 200 people. Instead of publishing white papers and books, took 200 people from Colorado, took 200 people from Indiana, took 200 people from New Jersey. And she led the tour. We spent 2 days in Milwaukee. We introduced them. Zakiya did, I didn't. Zakiya arranged it. That we would sit down with the NAACP, we'd sit down with the chamber, we'd sit down with the teachers union, we'd walk through Brother Bob's private school, we'd walk through St. Joan and Tita's private school to see what vouchers are like. We'd go through a traditional public school and see what that school is like, and folks were sitting in a system of choice. So instead of reading a book or reading a white paper, we would actually go and see choice in reality. And the point of that was not just to go on a fact-finding trip, but actually to develop relationships. Develop relationships based on trust and based on an experience, a shared experience. And then when we came back, whether it was in Colorado or Indianapolis or over in New Jersey, we would sit down and say, okay, what kind of choice do you want? And what Zakiya was saying, you need to be sitting at the table when that choice is being written up. Because in California, when we wrote Prop 174, it was a bunch of lawyers. It wasn't parents that were writing it. And no wonder we lost 70-30.
So Kevin,
yeah.
on to just, we have to get moving a little bit, but I want to talk about our next panelist, parent.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Leah Vukmir, who really was the parent who started at the drawing board. I mean, and she had a really difficult challenge. She was talking about the issue of standards way, way, way before it was cool. She wanted better phonics in her state of Wisconsin. She was just a nurse. She was a mom and saw that there needed to be change. So she started a group, and she's now a distinguished state senator in Wisconsin because she fought all the way to the top. So Leah, before Common Core, tell us about standards.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and congratulations to the Center for Education Reform. Jeannie, I think I've known you all 20 years, that the education reform movement, we've been together. I have 7 minutes to tell you how I went from being a nurse to a mom with a cause, to a research fellow at a think tank, to a state representative and a state senator. Okay, get my roller skates on. It all started when I asked one very fateful question in my daughter's kindergarten classroom. She's 25 now, you can do the math. I asked the teacher if she could show me the research to support this reading program that wasn't working for my daughter and 75% of the kids in the class. Well, for asking that question, I was sent to the principal's office. And from there, the principal sent me to the superintendent's office. And suddenly, I found myself at school board meetings with 1 or 2 other parents, wondering why there weren't more parents at the school board meetings. I was writing letters to the editor. I started running into parents in the grocery store who had read my letters to the editor, and they started asking me questions. Now, as was mentioned, we didn't have the internet to go viral. It hadn't been invented yet. But at that time in the early 90s, we were lucky to have a very strong talk radio person in the name of Charlie Sykes, who was writing a book called Dumbing Down Our Kids. And we would fax some of our stories to him, various things that were happening in our classrooms, our children's classroom. He would talk about them on the air. Many of these stories he put into his book. And all of a sudden, we had a statewide coalition of parents because of the force of talk radio. That was how we went viral. We formed a parent group called Press, as was mentioned. I started going to the Capitol, had never done that before, testifying on various pieces of legislation. Governor Thompson got tired of me and my parent group and decided to put me on a task force. And I was on a task force for standards and learning. And that is literally how things got started for me. I also was working at the time as a nurse and was asked to be a research fellow at Wisconsin Policy Research Institute. At that time, I also had a state representative whose name was Scott Walker. And Scott Walker decided to run for Milwaukee County Executive. And while we were working on Scott Walker's campaign for county executive, we were doing campaign 101, stapling yard signs in the back of the headquarters. Somebody said, if Scott wins, who's going to run for his seat? And everybody's head turned to me. And they said, Leah, will you run? You've been doing all of this. You started this grassroots movement. You understand the process. And I said, sure. Are you all going to be there to help me? And that's literally how things got started for me. I served for 8 years in the Assembly, and I was elected to the Senate, took on an incumbent to help us get in the majority in 2010, and you all know what happened after that in the state of Wisconsin. But it has been an incredible honor and to be a part of this journey, to carry the baton for so many people before me who have fought in the trenches to move the issue of choice in Wisconsin, and not only in Wisconsin, but across the nation. So in Wisconsin, we have the landmark choice program. We have expanded our charter school movement. We have expanded choice statewide. I am now pushing for a special needs voucher program in the state of Wisconsin. At the time that we were organizing, the Milwaukee parents, Zakiya Courtney, was very actively involved. This was all happening at the same time. It was almost as if it was the perfect storm. Mm-hmm. There were so many people fighting for their children, and it was an incredible honor to work with Zakiya and her parents, and we worked side by side. Howard Fuller, Polly Williams, everyone on this panel has been touched by Polly Williams. In fact, when I was in the legislature, in the Assembly, and she was the chair of the Education Committee, and I was the ranking member on that committee, she called me in her office and we talked, and I told her what an impact that she had on my life and how I had seen her as a young mom. I was following her at all of her town hall meetings, talking with such passion about how we needed to reform education for all of our children. And I said to her, you know, Polly, on my good days up here, I bless you, and on my bad days, I curse you. And she did enjoy that. But you know, whether I was in the minority or whether I was in the majority, we were able to advance the cause of greater options for parents. And it really boiled down to one thing, and that was enlisting the help of the grassroots movement. And we were very fortunate at that time. We had a great grassroots movement, but it took leaders to bring everybody together. And so that's what you can do in your state. You need to find those people. And I learned from the legislators at the time when I was that mom with a cause. They said, you know, we need you. We can't just pass pieces of legislation without a groundswell of support from the people. And so it takes a variety of fronts. It takes the parents, the grassroots activists, it takes the lawmakers, it takes the think tanks to provide the research. I've had a unique opportunity to be on every side of that equation, and I will say that not one part of that is more important than the other. It is absolutely essential that all three work together. In the end, I truly believe one person, one group of individuals can make a difference. Each and every one of you has the ability to do that by taking a passion, organizing people, take your case to your state capitol, put a face on that case. Remember when we did the Lift the Cap on the Choice program, and we had kids who were going to be thrown out of their schools because we had reached the cap? We had those children come into the Capitol, and they stood there quietly, incredible, just so stoic. They did not speak out. They stood there, held their signs with such poise and grace. Every time we walked into the Assembly chambers, every time we walked into the Senate chambers, they were there as a quiet force, and they put a face on the need for us to reform even more. And that's what you have to do. Sometimes we get too bogged down on facts and figures, but remember the children, remember the families, and that's how you will win. Thank you.
Thank you. It's truly about telling the stories and making it emotional, because we need to get more parents to be doing the work that you all have done, the hard work, and that's a really important part of it. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Bill, when you were on the school board and you... Thank you. When you were on the school board and you started school choice, was that just within your district, or did you allow your own students that you paid tuition for to another district?
There was no provision for inter-district choice at the time, and so our program was intra-district, but we had the second largest school district in the state, so that we had 4 high schools, half a dozen or more middle schools, so it was a fairly large community that was affected by these crazy rules that these guys on the school board thought up. And it worked, and parents felt better. We had had a busing order imposed in 1978. The population of our high schools steadily declined every year in a straight line down. The bottom of that curve was the day we announced that people could go where they wanted to go. And from that day on, people started to come back to the public school system. And then it became our charge to give them something decent to come back to, and that's what we're all wrestling with today.